Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Lauren. It is necessary. I think Tim made that point too. It's necessary to communicate some of these terms to be efficient and to be knowledgeable in the area that you're talking about. I think the big differentiator, and Tim touched on it, is some people are using these terms to establish status rather than to communicate ideas.
Right.
That to me is where it gets a little uncomfortable for me. So when you're at that conference of VCs, as long as they're using it in a room where the audience knows what the term is, great. Use it. Use CAGR, EBITDA, whatever terms you want to use that are specific to that industry. But if you're doing it just to kind of show the room, hey, I'm pretty smart, and you may not know what I'm talking about, then that to me is probably a reason not to use it.
Welcome to episode 155. When I saw Bob Wiltfong's TED Talk titled How to Take the BS Out of Business Speak, I had to have him on my podcast. Bob immediately accepted and asked me to bring Tim Ito, the founder of Marketing Nice Guys and co-author of their book, The BS Dictionary. According to Bob and Tim, the main goal of communication is to convey ideas and bring people together around them, not to look smart. Using too much BS, as in business speak and the other word you thought about first, can be jargony, confusing, and even exclusionary. Data from Expert Market Data dated September 2023 state that 86% of employees cite the lack of effective collaboration and communication as the main causes for workplace failures. Now, how much of that is due to BS? In this episode, Bob and Tim will teach you how to master the art of communication in order to create an environment of sustained growth in your business. I also have my own BS. Stop being the bottleneck in your business. Take my scorecard called the Bottlenecks Index. It will help you identify your hidden bottlenecks, assess their impact on your business, and provide practical tips to immediately tackle them. It's free and it's on my website. Now let's turn to our conversation. Hey Tim, Bob, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here.
That's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Right, so I'm really much looking forward to this conversation, but let's go into BS directly.
Let's get straight to the BS.
Yeah, straight to the BS. What is BS?
Well, it's business speak or bullshit, depending on your point of view, Lauren. We wrote the book, The BS Dictionary, Uncovering the Origins and True Meanings of Business Speak. So in our lexicon, its first default meaning is business speak, but the double meaning is bullshit as well. It's the BS is the language we use on the job and only on the job to describe and define things. So the example I give is at home, I might say to my son, are you ready to go? While at work, using the language of BS, I'm more likely to say, is it scalable for you to give me an ETA on departure? So that's BS. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a big BS, this one.
Yeah.
So is business speak BS as it bullshit?
Yeah, I mean, it can be. I think, we can get into this, but every industry's got its own little language now.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is that everything is so specialized these days that I think people feel this need to belong and show that they know this specialty that they're in. And what happens is that, there's a lot of jargon used in a lot of different places. Is it BS? Is it bullshit in a lot of ways? In some ways it is. In some ways, I think it's just a necessary part of that sort of industry or that culture that you're into.
And does it know any borders?
Increasingly, no, because we live in a globalized economy more and more. We're doing business with everyone around the world, right? Whether it be virtually like we're doing today or in person. You're doing business with people in China, India, the United States, Europe, Africa, South America all the time. So one of the common languages of business is English, and a caveat, a subsection of that is this BS, which, to Tim's point, there is some need for it. There's some shorthand that is necessary to describe and define things effectively and efficiently. But what our bone to pick is that it's too often used as a way to shield what we commonly know as bullshit, basically. You're just cliched and not saying much.
Have you done any research in other languages than English?
Yeah,
We
Bob.
do.
Hey, Bob did a whole thing about like BS in different languages, like Germany and Chinese and other things like that. So there are certainly terms that are used in different languages that are, really unique to just those places and those cultures.
Yeah.
Yeah, a thought that occurs to me, Tim's right. We did research on different phrases in different languages and also some terms that we've adopted in the English language from different languages. So German has a lot, like Zeitgeist and kaputt are German words that are used in BS in the English language. But one of my favorites that falls in this category of what you're talking about is there BS in other languages? For an American English speaker, when we say a business task is impossible to do, we will often refer to it as it'll happen when pigs fly. In the Netherlands, the same concept will often be described as when the calves dance on the ice.
Yeah.
And in Russia, they will say, same idea, it will happen when a crayfish whistles from the mountaintop. So,
Do you know what they say in France?
No, what?
We say when chickens will have teeth.
There you go.
So that's great.
Yeah.
So you started talking about the reason why it exists, BS exists, but I would like to go deeper. And I went to this event 2 or 3 days ago, and it was an event for VCs mainly. I'm not part of that world, right? So for VC, for those who don't know, it's venture capitalist.
Yes.
And it is really much outside my area of expertise. And there was a lot of BS, a lot of, this industry has developed a lot of specific words like VCs, like LPs, like I learned a new word, emerging fund managers. I didn't know it existed. Second fund. I mean, there's so many words that some of the conversations, some of the presentations they were making, honestly, I was lost. I didn't understand anything.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Like you say.
Yeah.
And your book described, I think, 300 words, if I'm correct. But you mentioned somewhere that you found more than 900, and not only in English.
Yeah.
So, what is the point of having all this BS when not all people can speak it?
I mean, the one thing I would say is that what has happened, I think, is that people inevitably, because everything became so specialized, like venture capital is a very specialized area. Marketing is this very specialized area, right? It just like public policy programs at a university are very specialized areas. They're just really the language that's used is become so technical. And I think a lot of the things have become so technical that I think people use shorthand, and then try to be part of this sort of club that sort of is in the know. I think you're seeing a lot of adoption of it because there's just this movement to sort of feel like you're in the know of things. There's this, I often say there's this concept in marketing called social currency. And what it is that you hear something and you pass it along to seem cooler, smarter, funnier, or whatever. It could be a joke. It could be any number of things. It's the same principle, I think, that happens with jargon and BS, is that you hear something and then you really want to pass that along to seem cool or smarter or in the know. And I think that's a lot of what happens. Unfortunately, for people who are outside, that gets harder. So, some of that is just knowing your audience and knowing who you're speaking to, because ultimately you're a bottleneck guy, Laurent. And so like you don't want to create a bottleneck. If you want to better communicate, you have to understand who you're talking to. And I think that's what happens with a lot of people is they don't differentiate people in the industry versus outside.
Absolutely. But you see, for instance, sorry, Bob, we'll go to you. Like I'm a startup mentor, right? So, and before being a startup mentor, I was not familiar with the startup world, but I had to learn the startup BS so that when I have a coaching conversation, a mentoring conversation, I understand what they're telling me.
Yeah.
You know, so if you want to be part of the club, like you said, Tim, you have to learn the language instead of them making, an effort to adapting to you, to everybody.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Laurent. It is necessary. I think Tim made that point too. It's necessary to communicate some of these terms to be efficient and to be knowledgeable in the area that you're talking about. I think the big differentiator, and Tim touched on it, is some people are using these terms to establish status rather than to communicate ideas.
Right.
That to me is where it gets a little uncomfortable for me. So when you're at that conference of VCs, as long as they're using it in a room where the audience knows what the term is, great. Use it. Use CAGR, EBITDA, whatever terms you want to use that are specific to that industry. But if you're doing it just to kind of show the room, hey, I'm pretty smart, and you may not know what I'm talking about, then that to me is probably a reason not to use it.
Yeah. Now imagine if companies start doing it with their customers.
Oh yeah. There's this phenomenon called the curse of knowledge. And to me, and it was coined by an economist, I believe it is Tom Hogwarth. I may have the name wrong, but it's called the curse of knowledge. And that also is a reason why people use it. And the idea behind the curse of knowledge is you become so knowledgeable about something, you forget what it's like to be new to it. And so in a room of VCs, they don't appreciate that there are people that are new to this world. And they're just throwing it around and not even thinking about, oh, this may be a new term to my audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a marketing guy, Tim.
Yes.
Do you see that a lot, that issue of, communicating too much BS to your customers?
Yeah, I mean, we deal a lot with small businesses. So small businesses, I don't want to say they're not as sophisticated in the marketing terminology as maybe other customers are, but I think everything now has become, even social media marketing, right? Just a branch of marketing has become so specific in terms of like the terminology used. Like email marketing has its own lingo, right? If you do e-commerce, it has its own language. And I think the hard part for a lot of businesses and a lot of entrepreneurs is just, especially when it comes to marketing, is just each one has its own. So like I'm just trying to learn marketing and you're throwing terms at me that are this, and this, right? It's a lot of, I think now it's on, like in all these different industries, I would say it's become overwhelming to the point where, like I said before, I think to me, it's a matter of always, as a business, you have to understand the audience you're talking to, whether that's your employees, whether that's the customers you have, whether that's whoever it is, partners. You have to understand kind of their knowledge level or what they don't know, because sometimes you have to stop and you have to explain it. Like I teach a class, so I say KPIs. Does everybody know what KPIs means? And some of people in the class don't, right? So I think that's where you have to, I think, be a little bit more empathetic to the person that you're talking to.
And I think embrace the culture where it's okay to raise your hand and say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Too. That's important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's, so in the end, because again, what I see more and more is, I have the impression that the bigger the company, the more sophisticated the language, and it is done on purpose, like you said, or because we want to show off.
Right.
Yeah.
But there is one very simple rule that every marketers know. It's the KISS rule. Keep it short and simple, or keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
It's the version I prefer. And it works, all the time. Basically, simple ideas have a better impact than complicated ideas. But why? So if we know that, why do we always forget about it?
It's a good question. That's the $1 million question, right? Is why do we still do this? I think my professional background when I came out of college was as a journalist. And one of the rules of journalism is on first reference of any term that your audience may not know, you spell it out. So KPIs, for example, key performance indexes, right? You say that fully on first reference, and you put in parentheses, I'm going to refer to it as KPI moving forward.
Yeah.
And then, you can say KPI all day. But I think that's a good general practice for us in today's world is first time we reference even VC, say venture capitalist, otherwise known as VC. Now I'm going to say VC all day. Just to clear the air, just to make sure that everybody in the room knows what you're talking about, because that's the ultimate goal of communication is to communicate ideas, to bring people together around ideas. And if you don't do that, then you're not accomplishing the goal of communication. The other thing I wanted to say that I'm reading a fascinating book. It's called Words on the Move, and it's by a linguist by the name of John McWhorter. And he makes an analogy of language, that language is like clouds, that they are there, but they're ever changing and evolving. And that's what makes this even more complicated is you have this cloud of BS that through your different demographics, where you're at in the world with the different time or the different audience is kind of changing. So it's even more important, I think, these days to acknowledge that and just on first reference, say the things what they mean and then move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick example. So like the other day I was reading about AGI. Somebody mentioned AGI.
Yeah.
And it was in reference to OpenAI. So I figured, okay, maybe that's something. What's the G stand for, right? But it was artificial general intelligence, which is something very, very specific to that industry. And it's as opposed to like, well, what I knew AGI was, which was adjusted gross income. So I'm like, why are they talking about it?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's where, you have to, like, I had to look it up. I had to look at what exactly does the G stand for? I figured it was artificial intelligence of some kind, but then reading into artificial general intelligence, it is the ability for a machine to basically do all kinds of tasks similar to a human being that a human being can, but not just specific tasks. So like they said that there's, more advanced, this is the more advanced form of AI, which I didn't know, right?
Yeah.
And I had to look up. And I think that's where, all these different terms are coming out rapidly where, if you want to keep up, you have to look it up and you have to go, what is that?
It's impossible to keep up.
It is.
Especially in English, because you're very good at creating acronyms.
Exactly.
Look, BS.
That is so true.
Do you find that, Lauren? Do you find as a native French speaker that in English we have more slang, we have more ever like the word of the moment than the French language does?
It's difficult for me to answer that question because I do business in English.
Okay.
And I've been doing business in English for the last 25 years, but I do find that you have, a lot of acronyms all the time. They don't mean necessarily the same thing. And it's getting worse and worse. And there are a lot of words. English is really good for business because you have very specific words, that French doesn't have, so for French, it would take a lot of BS to describe something. Like, for example, accountability. There's a difference between being accountable, being responsible. In French, we don't have that difference.
Ah.
Yes. So accountable is translated by responsible. So
wow.
It's difficult. It's difficult to explain. Yeah, maybe that's why French are like that.
I'm not accountable. I'm responsible.
Exactly. But I find it. Yeah, sometimes really hard to follow. Especially the acronyms, because like you said, like, hold on, what is that acronym? because it's something new, or it is something different that what it is. I know it for.
Yeah. Now, I don't feel so bad because Tim and I are parents of American children who speak.
Yes.
Right.
Now I don't feel so bad, Tim, that we don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, nobody knows what they're saying.
Right.
Oh, but it's the same in French. The young generation, they invent words all the time.
Yeah.
When you hear them talking, I have no idea what they're talking about. It doesn't even sound French anymore.
We always say, that's not a word. That's
Yeah.
not a word.
It gets back to the idea, the very nature of language is this ever-evolving lexicon.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
Yeah, exactly. So what are you trying to say? What messages are you trying to convey through your book?
So I know the three main headlines that I share in presentations about this topic are: we want to get across to the whole world, whoever wants to listen, is to acknowledge that BS, or business speak, is generally the language of the elite. So bear that in mind, that in order to play in this world of high-end business, venture capitalists, for example, it would benefit you to learn the language and to speak.
Yeah.
So apply yourself to that. Now, the flip side of that is to realize that because you can speak it, you're shutting out some people in the world that don't know what you're talking about, and to appreciate that. The second thing is we encourage people to stay away from using it as cliched thoughts. So synergy or change agent, those are words that start to tend to become cliched after a while and lose some of their meaning. So we encourage people to communicate fresh ideas without using stale old business speak. And then the final thing we want to get across to folks is that we are in this globalized economy, and to realize that a lot of our BS these days can get lost in translation. The earlier examples where you brought up, Lauren, about the chicken, having teeth.
Yeah, not having teeth. Or when you will have teeth. Yeah.
Right. As an American, at first reference, I'd be like, why are we talking about chickens? Right? What's going on here? So it's just being aware that some of the phrases that we consider common sense or context clues can clue you in on what it means, may get lost in translation. You just have to realize that the more and more we talk to international audiences. Tim, did you have some thoughts?
No, I mean, I think you said it. You said it well. I think, like I said previously, I think a lot of it is just understanding who you're talking to, and if you understand who you're talking to, you can customize it so they feel comfortable. Because ultimately, if you want to communicate, you want to make sure that your audience feels comfortable with what you're saying and they understand what you're saying. Because that's the best way to avoid a bottleneck in terms of like what you're trying to get out there. That is just sort of common sense. And I think a lot of people just get wrapped up in the moment. They kind of just think about themselves, but they're not thinking about the other people out there.
But I see that many times, especially in the startup world, and a bottleneck you were talking about is this inability that startup founders and the team have to get out of their technical solution. And it goes outside the startup world. I also face the same challenge. It's very difficult to put yourself into your customer's shoes and speak the customer's language. You really have to force yourself to get out there and speak their language, speak their BS.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why Tim and I make a living as marketers. Right. We work with engineers and people that are very smart, but they have a very hard time communicating in layman's terms what their ideas mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Engineers are particularly very difficult for them. Very, very smart. Usually they have a very strong, very good idea. They solve a key problem, but they have a lot of difficulty to transfer, communicate, the solution to their customers.
I think that's part of the brilliance of some of the great thinkers through time is the idea that the genius is in the edit. So when I think of Albert Einstein, E equals MC squared, part of the brilliance of that is it's when you look at the in-depth meaning of that, it is really complicated and thought-provoking. But it's communicated in the E equals MC squared. It's a very easy idea to wrap my head around on first glance. So that to me that's part of the reason why that resonates so much.
But I think there is one industry that is out there, like the elite of the elite, and they will never change. The lawyers.
Oh,
yeah.
who often become politicians who often speak a lot of BS too. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And doctors, that's one of my experiences is doctors. They're getting better in my own personal experience. But man, how many times have you sat at a doctor's office and they're using medical terms about what's wrong with you that you're like, I don't know even what body part we're talking about, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You speak English?
Yes. What does that mean? Am I going to die? That's all
That's all I want to know.
Yeah, keep it simple. That's what exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
In the movie Forrest Gump, there is a scene where Forrest Gump is talking and he said, "My mama always said, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get."
Right.
Use the same reference in your book. You describe business is like a box of chocolates. Can you explain?
I mean, we did a few different movie terms, and some of it is because movies are a good way that those phrases or jargon become part of the culture, right? We often, like, I'll give you an example, like the right stuff. We like, so a term that came out of that was push the envelope, right? It was, so Tom Wolfe wrote the book about the space program, and Chuck Yeager and a bunch of other people who had kind of been pioneers in that. And they, the phrase had been around for a while, but he was the one who really popularized it. And then when the movie came out, this idea of pushing the envelope, which now is really a part of our jargon, which means to kind of go beyond what you think is possible. I think for us, what was fascinating with things like that, where you see arts or culture push language, is that, I didn't really know the origin of what that was. So the envelope in this case isn't like a paper envelope, like that you send a letter in. It is the mathematical envelope, where it's the slope, for example, if you had a ladder against a wall, it's the slope at which the center of the ladder falls down the wall. So what a lot of the pilots at that time were kind of thinking were, oh, well, how fast can we make this plane go and then still make the turn?
Yeah.
And so that was the idea of pushing the envelope, but it became sort of a regular part of business speak. So a lot of the arts, influence the language we use on the job, I think.
Yes. Thinking of the right stuff, it also gave us screw the pooch.
Yeah, it also gave us through the pooch, exactly.
Very
I
uncomfortable.
didn't know that one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Feel free to use it, Lauren.
Tom Wolfe is great because he also, right, the whole term masters of the universe, right? Everybody using masters of the universe, that came from his book, right? Yeah. So
Lauren, back to your original question, life is like a box of chocolates. There's a literal meaning to that, right? Which is, life is kind of this unknown but sweet discovery, right? And there's some of that to BS. And the other part of it is what Tim's mentioning, is that these movie phrases become quick shorthand to describe a bigger issue. So in business, other movie phrases that have become common, at least in American English, is if you build it, they will come. Coffee is for closers.
yes,
All these things come
May
from
the force be with you.
Yeah, man.
you are. Yeah.
This isn't my first rodeo.
This is
Comes from Mommy Dearest. So all these, things that we kind of take for granted actually came out of movies.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what is interesting about your book, is because it is a dictionary. You're going like from A to Z with different words. You're giving like the real definition, and then you're giving like a BS definition. So there was one that I took like very funny. Ballpark, the real definition is rough estimate. Your BS definition is pulling a number out of one's, which is
really
much what it. I completely agree.
Yeah.
But then you give the origin of that BS. That's really interesting. So
Thank you, Lauren. And Tim's been instrumental, and the research has really been Tim's baby. So Tim is the expert on origin research.
I mean, I think it's a fascinating topic because, where things come from, to me, is is just one of those things I'm just curious about. Like, where does that word actually come from? Where did that phrase, who started that phrase? Like, who created that? And I think, you don't always get the exact answer, but you can kind of at least see where it appeared now. There's a lot of great resources out there that you can kind of figure that out through research.
Yeah, you've had some origin stories that Tim stumbled upon are great, like Lunch and Learn, right? It was from two housewives in Nebraska. Tim found that out. We actually compared notes with the Oxford English Dictionary, and they gave us credit for that one. We were like, hey, we found something that they didn't know. And, there's other things like boondoggle. The origin story of that is fascinating to me. Steal One's Thunder is a fascinating origin story, and that's all in the book. I agree with Tim. Some of the funnest parts of writing this book is just finding out where the heck these terms came from. Yeah. Some of the stories are movies, possibly. They're the plot of these origin stories is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite BS words?
Go ahead. You want to go first? Or?
Well, I am still fascinated, and it ties into the origin. I think Bitcoin and blockchain is fascinating to me. And here's why, is because it has become, in the last 15 years, it is taken over the world. We know these words now. But the reality is we still don't know who originated these things. It was a white paper that dropped onto a message board that is the first reference of Bitcoin and blockchain, and the author is unknown. There are theories as to who the person is, but for the most part, these ideas of a blockchain just fell from the sky, which is fascinating to me. So those to me are right up there as far as my favorite BS words, just because of where it came, Tim.
I like, because of the origin, I like tycoon.
Oh, yeah.
Which, I did not know the origin. So everybody knows tycoon is obviously this, we think of it today as this rich industrialist or somebody who's just made a ton of money and they're a tycoon. But the actual origin is different from that. So we did some research and we realized that actually it's a Japanese term that got changed over time. And what happened was that, so the story goes, is that Matthew Perry, Commodore Perry, basically went to Japan, and he, is the famous Black Ships incident where the Japanese sort of realized that they were really behind on the technology. And so Perry was the spurring, made the Japanese kind of have the whole Meiji period, which is the whole restoration, basically the modernization of today's Japan. But at the time, Perry went to Japan and he demanded to see one of the basically the emperor, the head. But Japan was ruled by the Tokugawa shogunate, so like there was just fiefdoms all over the place. So they had to create a term for him to use, for someone to meet. So they created this term tycoon, which means sort of great lord or great prince. And Perry brought.
What year was that? Sorry.
That was in the 1860s. So Perry brought that back to Washington, and Lincoln's aides loved that term so much they started calling Lincoln the tycoon.
Yeah.
And so actually Abraham Lincoln was the first tycoon.
Yeah.
Which is really sort of, I think it's just a fascinating, and then it morphed over time to have the meaning of rich industrials, which I don't know how it got from Abraham Lincoln to a rich industrials.
Yeah.
I mean, I find things like that really interesting because you don't, like when you use a term, you just sort of use it. You don't really understand where it comes from. Like a lot of people say drinking the Kool-Aid, but they don't realize it comes from the whole Jim Jones Guyana incidents where, they all committed suicide.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I don't know.
And it wasn't even Kool-Aid. It was
it wasn't even Kool-Aid. Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think you talk about that, Bob, in your TED talk. Yes,
yeah.
That's why I know. That's why I know about it. Yes.
Yeah, and I always love bringing that up in front of an international audience because the majority of them look at me like, "What are you?
What is drinking the Kool-Aid?" But we all use it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We all.
Yeah.
Wow.
Are you guys planning to write more books about BS?
Yes, we are actually in the middle of slowly but surely getting a second edition put together right now. As you mentioned, Lauren, earlier, we've kept a list because we're like this. Tim and I are word geeks.
Yeah.
We keep a list of anytime there's this, like AGI, for example, we put that on a list and say, oh, this would be a good BS term to define in the future. So we have, I think, roughly it is 900 plus words that we're considering for a second edition of the BS Dictionary. And we'll put it together and put it out for the publishing industry to hopefully put it out there on bookshelves.
Are you planning then after that maybe to, do a BS Dictionary per industry?
Sure. I know. It should be, we should have a consulting group. We should,
Right.
Yeah. We should make cars, Tim. We should,
We should brainstorm.
we could brainstorm this. Yes.
Okay, good. So I want to switch gear a little bit, and because this show is about entrepreneurship, and I want to talk about entrepreneurship a little. Tim, I know you're an entrepreneur, you're a business founder. What about you, Bob? Do you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
To a certain degree, I was a journalist, then I became an actor and a comedian, which is basically you're selling yourself. I mean, your business is yourself. I did that for 20 plus years. And I do consulting work, which is on a freelance basis, which is also the business of selling yourself as a consultant. So I certainly know some of the tools, and Tim and I have shared marketing tips with one another about how to market better. But I don't have a business. I don't have an LLC but I do.
But you build stuff.
Yes,
that's the definition of an entrepreneur. Is to build stuff. All right. So I'm going to consider you as an entrepreneur then.
Yeah.
What does it mean for you to be entrepreneurs?
I'll answer that first, maybe, Bob. I love the freedom of it. I mean, I was telling somebody the other day, I wouldn't. It's hard to go back, at my age and kind of where I'm at in my career. I think I really enjoy the freedom to be able to do what I want to do. Yeah. And I think, and how I approach clients and how I work with clients and all that, it's ultimately up to me. And I like that. And how well we do is, some of it is obviously on a scale of how hard you work. Some of it is on, there's luck involved, there's other things involved, but I really like it in the fact that I think I can manage my own time. I have the ability to kind of work when I want, right? I don't have to necessarily be in an office and show up all the time here. I can work at night. I could work weekends if I want. I can work during the day. I could work, right? So I think there's a great freedom in it. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of, obviously you're taking on a lot of, you have to try to make money. And so I think there's a lot of, it can feel a little bit like you never get off that hamster wheel, as it were, right? You're always kind of running and running and running. But that said, I think I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah, I would agree with Tim. I think that there's a lot of, I really enjoy executing a vision. That is my vision, and there's something very satisfying about that. It's also satisfying to be part of a team executing a vision, but to have the idea in your mind, and the book is kind of like that. Really, when we've written it, it's Tim and I coming together and say, what kind of book do we want to read? What kind of book do we like? And let's write it. So yeah, executing the vision. I also like the ability as an entrepreneur to still collaborate. And I like the freedom to collaborate with just good, thoughtful people. And when you're collecting a paycheck, you don't necessarily have the means or the ability to go to a different industry and say, hey, I want to work with you.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, you can do that, which to me is part of the benefits of being an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. What have you guys learned about yourself since you started that journey?
I think for me, I didn't know, honestly, before I started this business, whether or not my approach to doing things would be successful. I don't know if that resonates with other guests you've had, Laurent, but like for me,
it resonates with me.
I wasn't initially confident that we could run a business, and I have a business partner, and we went in together to do it, and Bob's sort of our advisor on the whole thing. And I think I didn't really understand whether or not like my literal approach to how I did business or how I conducted it would be successful. And it was sort of gratifying to Bob's point that if you have a certain way of doing things, then you can see other people not only accept it, but it works for those individuals. Yeah. I think that's the nice part.
Yeah, it's sort of like being a parent for the first time. You sit there and go, man, I could do it so much better, and then you have the child, you're like, oh, this is harder than I thought, but it's also more rewarding because you're like, I'm shaping this child the way I want to raise a child in the world. So there's both of that going on. I think what I've learned about myself is there are two skill sets and not everybody has them. And some are more developed than others. Some were more inclined to do it than others. One is leading a pack. And the second is being a good team member. Mm. And as an entrepreneur, you've got to do both. I mean, you're not completely independent. But when you're collecting a paycheck, when you're a salaried employee, you've got to be a really good take orders, execute, move on, right? And as an entrepreneur, you've got to not only have a vision, but rally people around that vision.
Yeah.
I find that sometimes when I interact with other entrepreneurs, some entrepreneurs that have never had to collect a paycheck are almost unable to be a good just team member. They're used to just executing their ideas. Mm. So it's difficult for them, and vice versa. If you've spent your whole life just collecting a paycheck, to suddenly be in charge, like Tim said, it can be like, I don't know how to start. I don't know. I've never done this. But those two skill sets, if you have an individual that can do both those really well, that's a unique individual too.
Yeah. So it's a very, very good point. I'm curious, when you meet people now, knowing that you wrote the book, do people pay more attention to the words they use?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anytime after I speak, there's always this, I don't know if it's subconsciously, but you pick up in the conversation with people afterwards of like, okay, I'm not going to use any big words here. I'm not going to, if I do use big words, I'm going to define them, on first reference. So, that's the dilemma when we present our ideas around this topic is we're not asking people to dumb down. We're asking people just to know their audience and be sensitive to the pitfalls of communication sometimes with these terms. So yes, I do feel that when I'm talking to people post a presentation on this topic that they're kind of cognizant, okay, I'm not going to use EBITDA on first reference. Find another term. Tim, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I never use EBITDA.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Get it out of the lexicon. Yeah.
I thought people outside France were not using EBITDA, actually.
Yeah.
It's surprising, though, the number of people who do. And sometimes they just throw it out there as if it's a very strange term to ever put in a conversation.
Yeah. And
before interest, taxes, all that, right? It's just a really strange thing to put in any conversation with any employee, right? But it does. I've been certainly in companies where people threw that word around, and I just make more money. How can we keep it simple? Like I think that's the idea. We don't need to talk about what the EBITDA number is, right?
Right.
I think
is it a good investment or not?
Yeah.
Kager, I have an example. I did consulting work. This just like 3 years ago. I'd never heard this term before, and I worked with a company that threw around Kager all the time. And I don't know if you have this touch point in your background, Laurent, but from an American who grew up in America, Kager is synonymous with like a beer drinking party at college because there's kegs of beer, and we called them Kagers. Okay. So when I was doing this consulting gig with this business company, they were referring to Kagers. That's where my mind went. I was like, oh, we're talking about beer? And then I had to look that up, and they're throwing it around because it's, common in their terminology. So.
Yeah, but that's interesting because you guys are marketing guys. You advise clients on their communication. What are the common mistakes you see?
One of the things that I see routinely is that with onboarding of new employees, there's no education on common terms used within the four walls.
Yeah.
Tim talked about how niche and how specific some of our industries have become, and even within companies, there are specific lexicon used at Tesla that I'm sure they don't use at Google. And when you onboard a new employee, it would be helpful just to have a glossary of terms on day one and say, hey, we refer to these things on shorthand. So just be aware of that. So that's something that I would advise every listener to do in their companies is put together a glossary of terms for new employees.
That's a great advice. I've never thought about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal that from you to advise my client now.
Okay.
I mean, I think the other thing that happens, at least because I work with a lot of small businesses, is that they tend to bring their lexicon over when it comes to the audience. And so a lot of it happens to reflect them, but not who the audience is. Again, I think inherently we're all sort of, I hate to use the word solipsistic, but we're all a little bit the idea of us just looking at ourselves and what we care about and who we are, right? Without sort of thinking about, oh, maybe they don't know what this is, or maybe we need to explain what this is, or maybe, and that happens a lot in marketing, and it's companies inevitably reflect who they are without necessarily thinking about who the audience is. And that happens every day. Big, small, medium-sized company, everybody.
Absolutely. All right. Time for my last and favorite question.
Okay.
I want you guys to take all the experience that you have, through as entrepreneurs, the experience that you have acquired through writing the book, and give me one practical recommendation for other business founders.
I'll go first.
Okay.
All right.
And I think it is stop thinking about yourself and think about who you're speaking to or your audiences. I mean, it is, to me, the cardinal rule of not only business, but it's a life skill, right? You really want to be able to think about someone else. And if you think about someone else, I think you'll find that you're more successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my advice would be think about how would you describe this to your spouse or to your parent or somebody who knows nothing about your industry over dinner or the next visit, and use that as your jumping off point of how you're going to describe it to your next audience. Because there's power, again, you're not trying to dumb down things, but just try to make it really simple and clear in a powerful way. Efficiently, here's what I'm trying to say.
Amazing. Great, guys. So, there's one more thing to do. How can people contact you? Where can they find your book?
They can contact me, through LinkedIn is probably the best way to get a hold of me. So I'm Bob Wiltfong. There isn't too many Bob Wiltfongs in the world. So you'll find me on LinkedIn, and the book, which is right here, this is what it looks like.
So can you give the title again for the listeners?
Yeah, it's the BS Dictionary, Uncovering the Origins and True Meanings of Business Speak. And there's Tim and I's name there at the bottom. So that's how you spell our names. And you can find that book anywhere where fine books are sold. Amazon, Best Buy, not Best Buy, but Walmart. Some of the biggest retailers of books in the world have this.
Nice. Book. And I will put a link also in my show notes to your book.
Yep. Thanks, Lauren.
And then I'm Tim at marketingniceguys.com, but you can reach me on LinkedIn as well, and I'm available to talk to anybody about pretty much anything. So
let me just plug Tim. Tim is a super great resource in the world of marketing. So if you're a small company, especially who's looking for some marketing help, I highly recommend Tim Ito on Marketing Nice Guys. You've got to win.
That was very nice.
You're welcome. Tim is paying me under the table.
Yes, right. That was great.
No, he's great.
Thank you very much, guys, for your time today.
Yeah,
thanks for having us on, Laurent. This is great.
And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave me a 5-star review. Go to ratethispodcast.com/interviews podcast and follow the simple instructions. It only takes a minute, but it can make a massive difference in growing the podcast impact. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.